What is the Baltimore Ravens ceiling and what is their floor for the 2023 NFL season? We talk about that and so much more coming up next on this Monday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. And I'm your host, Kevin Ostraker, Ravens Wire. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available, all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube as well. And we made it. Look at us, everyone. We made it to the 2023 NFL season to just kick off week here. The NFL season starts on Thursday with the Kansas City Chiefs going up against the Detroit Lions. Baltimore obviously plays their season and home opener against the Houston Texans. And that should be a Ravens win, but we're going to get into all that over the course of this episode here today. We are a 5-day-week Ravens podcast, so Ravens news, analysis, updates. We have you here covered, and it's exciting now. This team, a lot of high expectations, so you can get all your Ravens coverage over here, whether you're an everydayer. I appreciate everybody who tunes in every single day. If you're somewhere in the middle, if it's your first time in the show as well, welcome in, welcome back. We have a lot to dive into. Particularly, I wanted to do an episode before the season started on what the Ravens' ceiling is and what their floor is, because I think a lot can go right for the Ravens and a lot can go wrong, just like any NFL team, right? But I want to get first into their ceiling. We'll start with the good stuff, right? Let's talk about where this team's ceiling is this season. But then in the second segment, we will talk disaster mode and what could happen for the Ravens if things don't go as planned. Then I don't want to get into my final record prediction for this episode here. I think we talked a lot about it over the course of the schedule release, and obviously we've known their opponents for a little while now, but I do want to get into my official final record prediction for this team. So lots to dive into on this episode, and we're going to get right into it right now. Starting with the Ravens ceiling. To me, I think the Ravens ceiling, well, there are a couple of ways that we can talk about this. We can talk about it record-wise. We can talk about it actual playoff success / Super Bowl success-wise. And then obviously for different players and different coaches and everything, we could do it too. We'll start off with record. I think when looking at the Ravens schedule, they have a lot of games that could go either way. Starting off the season with Houston, that again should be a win, but then you have Cincinnati and Cleveland and Pittsburgh as three of your next four games. That's a big stretch there. But other games, I think that, a Detroit game should be a win. Tennessee should be a win. Arizona should be a win. Like all these teams. And then you have Seattle. I think that's kind of a toss-up, although Baltimore probably will be favored in that. Los Angeles Chargers probably a toss-up. Baltimore will probably be favored in that one. Jacksonville, San Francisco, Miami, and that's not even counting the other divisional games. But I do think the Ravens have, compared to other teams, this is not a team that's playing a first-place schedule this season. So they don't have to go up against the Kansas Cities and the Buffaloes of the world. Now, I think those are really good games, and Baltimore would certainly have a shot. And look, the reality is if the Ravens want to get through the AFC, they're going to have to go through at least one, if not multiple, of Cincinnati and Buffalo and Kansas City. But to me, I think the ceiling, the absolute, Ravens have an amazing year. Everything, every single thing goes right for them. I would probably say right in that 14-3 range. I think that's their ceiling. Maybe if you want to get everything, maybe 15-2, right? I think that there will probably be a couple of losses in here to good teams, like maybe one to Cincinnati, maybe one to San Francisco, right? If you're talking about, everything goes right, the offense clicks, Lamar has an MVP season, Odell is wide receiver one Odell, the defense balls out, everybody steps up. Their ceiling is 14-3, 15-2 probably. Now, is that realistic? Probably not. I don't think every single thing is going to go right. And that, of course, we'll get to on our final record prediction, which will bump it down from that 15-2, ceiling. But then once you get to the playoffs, I think this is a Super Bowl team. I do. I think that they can make the Super Bowl and they can win the Super Bowl. That, to me, is their ceiling, where if everything goes right, I think they have enough pieces to claim the ultimate championship, their goal they've been talking about and thinking about for so long. And I know, again, Josina Anderson, who does a lot of great work, we talked about this last week, She said that she covered the Eagles a lot last season. She sensed something different within that organization, and they ended up going to the Super Bowl. With the Ravens, she said that she senses that same feeling. And again, Josina Anderson is somebody that is a Ravens believer. I know a lot of other people are as well, myself included. And just because a vibe feels different, it doesn't mean any team is going to make a championship, win a championship. But I think with what they have built off the field and on it so far, training camp, preseason, etc., the star power that they have, I do think the Ravens' ceiling is a Super Bowl. And I think that's really important to talk about because there's been a lot of disappointment, I think, over the past couple of seasons. And now a lot of it has to do with injuries, but, you can't pin every single thing on injuries. Now, yes, of course, Lamar Jackson makes a huge difference. Lamar Jackson is the Ravens, right? Like if Lamar's not there, the Ravens' chances of winning plummet. The ceiling plummets, the floor plummets, everything just plummets to the ground. So I'm not using Lamar's injury as the only reason why Baltimore didn't go far these past 2 seasons, but it sure did have an impact and quite a big one. But the thing is, I think for a lot of people, the Ravens haven't been able to reach their ceiling over the past 2 seasons because, again, the ceiling indicates everything goes right. And part of that is health. And Lamar has not been healthy to end the past 2 seasons, which has resulted in no playoffs at all in 2021, and then a wild card exit in 2022. If Lamar is on this team and plays a full 17 games, the Ravens can hit their ceiling. Now, I think there are certain injuries that would probably lower Baltimore's ceiling a lot. Marlon Humphrey's one of those. Now he's going to be out, but coming back early on by all indications during the year, which is fine. Other guys that could impact that, Ronnie Stanley, Mark Andrews, Justin Tucker, Marcus Williams, potentially, Roquan Smith. Those are all players that could have a profound impact on Baltimore's ceiling, but none have the impact that Lamar does. So I think schedule-wise, where you're not going up against the gauntlets of the conference, or even the gauntlets of some teams have to go and play Philly and Dallas and the NFC East, which is actually a pretty good division this season. The Ravens, they're going to get what I would assume would be decently easy. And again, there's no easy win in the NFL, but decently not hard wins against the Cardinals and the Rams. Again, the Rams and Cardinals could pull upsets. I'm not trying to count them out before the game, but you would think that, San Fran, Seattle, Arizona, and Los Angeles, the Rams and the Cardinals would be the easier games of the 4, and then Seattle and the 49ers would be harder. But I do think that with a 15-2 Super Bowl championship season, Lamar Jackson will blow all the narratives out of the water. The Ravens will do this, that, and the other, and all the talking points. But there has been a lot of talking around the Ravens this offseason, a lot of excitement around the team. But I think when it comes to ceilings for players, again, we're going to go best case scenario in this segment and then worst case scenario in the second segment. Best case scenario for Lamar is an MVP season. The offense is great. Best case scenario for Todd Monken is the offense clicks and he's able to utilize these guys to their full skill sets. Ceiling for John Harbaugh is being able to lead his guys, make good decisions. All the 4th down decisions are good and everything's good there. Mike McDonald grows in a year or two. For guys like J.K. Dobbins and Rashad Bateman, they can stay healthy and up their value. And Afe Owe and Justin Madubuike and Kyle Hamilton and Patrick Queen and all those guys continue to step up or do step up in bigger roles. I could go on and on and on about the ceiling of a lot of different players. But to me, I think this team could win the AFC North. They could win the Super Bowl. They could do a lot of things this season. And I think a lot of people are expecting them to be more towards their ceiling than their floor. But again, there are so many different factors. Health-wise, obviously, the best case scenario is no one gets injured. Now, you're talking about unrealistic. That is unrealistic. In fact, it is already unrealistic because the Ravens already have injuries at the corner room. So they're not healthy right now. And that has already limited some of their ceiling for the early part of the year because with Marlon gone, it's going to have to be the pass rush that steps up and, a lot of different stuff that has to happen. But to me, I do think the Ravens can hit their ceiling this season. I think their absolute best case scenario ceiling, you can talk 17-0, right? But I don't want to be a little realistic in it, right? I think 15-2 is their best case scenario ceiling. Super Bowl is their best case scenario ceiling. And then players will, we talked about those over the course of that segment. We do have more to talk about, though. It was a fun segment talking about, what it could be if everything goes right. But we do have to talk about the floor coming up. So we will talk about if everything went wrong for the Ravens, what could go wrong and how it could impact everything they do. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll have to dive into it on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. And football season kicks off this Thursday, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick between 2 to 5 players, select where they'll go higher or lower on one of their stats, then do what you usually spend kickoff night doing, watching the game. You can win up to 20 times your money in a single game by going 5 for 5. It's a fantasy game, but you can win real money. It's legal in over 30 states, and it's a ton of fun. If you want to build your dream team today, head over to their easy-to-use mobile app or website, underdogfantasy.com. When you sign up with their promo code Locked On, and not only will Underdog double your first deposit up to $200, but they also have a pick'em special live now in their pick'em lobby. Patrick Mahomes says that's to get 1 yard for your pick to be correct. Remember, that's Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with promo code Locked On. Use the link in the description or scan the QR code if you're watching us on YouTube. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, talking Ravens ceiling and their floor. Now, we talked about the ceiling in the first part of the show, so let's get into the floor. I know it's not going to be as fun of a segment as the ceiling segment, but look, we do have to talk about it here because there is the chance that stuff goes wrong. And in reality, it's going to be a mix of ceilings and floors for a lot of players, coaches, the organization in general when it comes to aspirations. But I think when it comes to how low is the Ravens' floor, I think their floor is not as low as their ceiling is high, if you understand what I mean by that. I think their ceiling is, yeah, they can hit the ultimate ceiling, but I don't think Baltimore is going to hit the ultimate floor. You know, the ultimate floor would be, they go 2-15 and they have no talent and everybody's injured and all the coaches are terrible. I think they have too much talent, player-wise, coach-wise, just everything that they have built over this offseason. I think that their ceiling is higher than their floor is lower. Their floor is lower than their ceiling is higher. So I hope I explained that well. The Ravens' schedule. Now, this is interesting because I mentioned those kind of toss-up games. Like maybe they lose a game to Houston or Indianapolis or Arizona or the Rams. Like, I think worst case, they lose a couple of those gimme games. And I think every team does this every year. That Baltimore's no exception, where they will win a game that no one counts them in for. And then they will lose a game that no one counts them out for. You know, a game that they're heavily favored, they drop, in a game where they're heavily underdogs, they win. It happens every season to every team in some way, shape, or form. But if they lose a couple of those games, if they lose almost all of the toss-up games or maybe games they're favored in by a little bit, like Tennessee and Detroit and Seattle and the Chargers and Jacksonville and the 49ers and the Dolphins, and then maybe they lose a divisional game here or there too, like the Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, both games. I could see them, and this is weird because with Lamar healthy, I think they have a pretty stable floor. But then again, you're talking about the actual floor. Lamar probably gets injured in the worst case floor scenario, which is not what I want to happen whatsoever. I'd probably give them like a 5-11, like absolute, like everything goes terribly and everyone gets injured and the coaching staff, like the offense doesn't click. 5-11 is probably their floor. But again, that's like worst case. Worst case for them is probably 5-11, because I think even if Lamar goes down, they still have enough talent to win games. But then again, does Marlon go down? Does Mark Andrews go down? It's a lot of what ifs in these first two segments. But again, with the Ravens and with every NFL team, is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. It's going to be some ceiling and some floor. But I do think that there is more working in the favor of the Ravens. But what if Lamar can't bounce back? What if there's stuff that goes on throughout the season where J.K. Dobbins has an injury or Rashad Bateman has an injury? Or what if the defense, there were issues both offensively and defensively last year. What if the defense can't tackle again? What if they can't finish sacks again? What if the pass rush isn't good? And then that leads to quarterbacks having 3, 4, 5, 6 clean seconds in the pocket to throw. What if the secondary can't cover and it's a bunch of quick passes? There are all those questions on defense. Then offensively, what if the line can't protect for Lamar? What if guys can't take leaps like a Tyler Linderbaum or a Rashad Bateman? What if Odell Beckham Jr. isn't his actual New York self, which I don't expect anyway. I expect him to be not New York prime Odell, but what if he can't be, a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2? Is he slow on the knee? He hasn't looked it, right? Like, he's looked good in training camp, but we don't really know. Like, there are so many things that could go against the Ravens, and I think when you look at that 2021 season, I would have never expected what actually happened to happen. I would have never expected the Ravens to lose J.K. Dobbins on that one drive in the Commanders preseason game. Never in a million years would I have thought that Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards would tear their ACL on back-to-back plays. Sometimes just bad luck things happen. And so many things are just attributed to luck, and then other things are attributed to, well, it's a coaching issue, it's a player issue, guys aren't good, coaches and players aren't meshing. It's weird to kind of think of the Ravens as that team because they've been so consistent over the course of their entire franchise history. Now, there are years sprinkled in where they were not good, and whether that is due to injury or just, not being a good team. But that's very rare when you look up and down. The playoffs are there. Now, has the playoff success been great? No. But again, when you talk about floor, I don't necessarily know if the Ravens have a realistic shot of actually hitting anywhere close to that worst case floor unless literally everything goes wrong for them. And I think that's a good thing that they won't hit that floor unless, again, things go wrong. But it's kind of scary to think about where it'd be the third straight year of something going wrong like this, where we saw growth in Lamar's first 3 years. They made the playoffs in the first year because Lamar essentially carried them to that playoff berth. Then the second year, they go 14-2, earn the 1 seed, get the bye, and then lose to the Titans, which we will not talk about. And then they actually beat the Titans the next year in the playoffs in the wild card game, so they won a playoff game. But the growth hasn't been there. And I think that's been the discouraging part for fans, for the organization, players, coaches, where I think every year there's something that feels special, but then something happens. And I'm not trying to blame everything on injuries and bad luck. And I'm not trying to blame everything on coaching staff failures and players not stepping up. It is a combination of both, but that's how you hit your floor. Where if both things don't go well, that's where you hit your floor. Baltimore hasn't done that historically. They haven't had these, tons of 5-11 seasons. It's very rare that Baltimore is like a bad football team and they're picking super high up in the draft. Now, we have seen that before. I'm not saying it is completely just not in their history, but especially with Lamar, I just think he raises the floor. There is a safe floor with Lamar, but in the worst case scenario floor, Lamar's not there. So to me, I think their worst case floor is 5-11, no Lamar. They drop all these games. They can't get stuff put together. And that to me is where I am with that. Coming up, though, in our final part of the show, we'll talk about final record predictions for this team. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. And our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Benny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we'll be providing you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Benny has picked out for us in this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And for me, I'm going to go with a former Raven here if you're looking for a player to take in fantasy football drafts who will spark your new team's offense and also help you speed to victory. Then use a luxury pick on Giants tight end Darren Waller. The former Raider is already riding in style again with Daniel Jones locked into him all throughout training camp and the preseason. The connection is strong enough to already believe that Waller will go back to being a reliable cog in his position. Grab him after the top few tight ends are off the board. And again, Vinny Iyer from Locked Up Fantasy Football is going to help you win a fantasy championship in eBay Motors. So championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. The eBay Guarantee fit over 122 million parts and accessories to your vehicle right at your fingertips. You can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shock struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guarantee helps you understand exactly what part you need for a vehicle the first time. So go for it, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guarantee Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicles, look for the green check at the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. All items only, exclusions apply. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you talking Ravens football on kickoff week. The Ravens playing the Texans on Sunday at 1 p.m. It is a very nice feeling, I'll say, to have football almost back in the building. And you can subscribe to us here on Locked On Ravens, audio form, video form. It's the same show. You're not missing out either way. You can turn notifications on so you don't miss when we go live on YouTube. We go live after every game, also after every piece of big news. So I appreciate everybody being here today. But let's get into my final record prediction for this Ravens team. And we're going to just go through the schedule game by game, talk about it a little bit, and then we will get the actual final record prediction. You can add it up as we go, or I'll just say it at the end. So let's just start off with the first game, Texans. I expect this to be a win for the Ravens. We know about the Week 1 Ravens, how good they historically have been in the Lamar Jackson era. I'm picking Baltimore to go out there and put on a pretty dominant performance against the Texans in Week 1. Week 2 at the Bengals. I'm going to say this one is a win. I'm going to say the Ravens go into the jungle at Paycor Stadium, and they beat the Bengals in a close game, but I think Baltimore played Cincinnati well last year. I expect Baltimore to want to get revenge for that playoff game that they should have won if Tyler Huntley didn't fumble that ball. So I'm expecting a 2-0 start, make it 3-0. I'm expecting a 3-0 start for the Ravens as they go and play the Indianapolis Colts. That's a home game for them. Again, Anthony Richardson, we know the Ravens, not only the week 1 Ravens, but for CJ, going back to the Texans for CJ Stroud, it's the week 1 Ravens and going up against rookie quarterbacks. That Ravens defense has been dominant. So it's bad news for CJ Stroud. It's also bad news for Anthony Richardson for the rookie quarterback aspect of that. So 3-0. Week 4 going to Cleveland. I'm going to say this one is a loss. Cleveland-Baltimore games are really weird. It feels like Cleveland always plays Baltimore tough for some reason. I don't know what it is. And I think Cleveland has a good roster this year. I wasn't a huge fan of the Deshaun Watson trade. I don't really know what he's going to be in Cleveland, his first full season there. But I'm going to say Baltimore loses this one, but it's going to be a close one. Week 5 against the Steelers, I'm going to say this one is a win. I'm going to say 2-1 in that divisional stretch, what I think would be, 3-0 would be great. I think 2-1 is ideal. I'm going to say it's an ideal start. So 4-1 for the Ravens in the first 5 weeks. Let's make it 5-1. And say the Ravens beat the Tennessee Titans in London. Now, let's hope this game goes better than what happened the last time the Ravens went to London, which we will not talk about. They lost to the Jaguars by an ungodly score. But I think the Ravens will have better success. They're gonna want to right the ship, and they might take a ship over there if they want to do the April Fool's joke. But yeah, I think it's a 5-1 start for the Ravens. I'll say they lose to Detroit. I'll say this will be a really weird game where Detroit has a sneaky roster. Jared Goff has kind of ascended a little bit. I don't think he's a top quarterback, but I think he's better than some people give him credit for. They add a lot of pieces there in Detroit. I'm going to say this is a weird loss for the Ravens where they go 5-2 in their first 7. Week 8, I think this is a win for the Ravens. I think Arizona, even though they got to travel there, I don't expect a big fight from Arizona. Maybe Kyler's back by now. Maybe he's not. I don't care either way. This to me is a win for Baltimore. Then I'm going to say they win against Seattle. It's a home game for the Ravens. They don't have to travel out to Seattle. They'll be traveling back from Arizona. But with Geno Smith, and look, Seattle has a really good team. That's actually, they'll see Caillou Kelly in that game if he's active. But I think this will be a close game, a good game. I think Baltimore pulls it out. Week 10 against Cleveland. To me, that is a win. I think Baltimore will not lose to Cleveland twice. I think they will split. So I'm going to say week 10 is a Cleveland loss. And then the earlier game, Cleveland wins it. So Baltimore beats Cleveland in week 10. Week 11 against Cincinnati. That's a Thursday night game, 8:15. Win. I'm going to say Baltimore sweeps Cincinnati this year. It's really bold. It's really, really bold. But I'm going to say it because I think, again, Baltimore's played Cincinnati well. They're going to be close games. They're going to be hard-fought games. But I do think Baltimore will sweep Cincinnati this season. That's one of my bold predictions. The Chargers. I'm going to say it's a win. Baltimore wins this game here. I think that Justin Herbert's great, but I do think that the Chargers are a team that are going to be a lot better than they have been. I could see this being a loss, but I'm going to say they win it in a close one. Then you have the Rams. I'm going to say that is a win as well. I think that this is going to be a big, just warm-up game. I don't want to necessarily say that because, again, no game is easy in the NFL. But, again, not a lot in Los Angeles scares me. Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald obviously do, but other than that, I don't really see a ton. Jacksonville, I'm going to say this is a loss, and this is where things kind of get weird for me. Jacksonville's a good team. They showed that against the Ravens last season. They're going back to Jacksonville to play this year. I'm going to say this is a loss. This is a primetime game. Then they go and they play the 49ers on Christmas. I'm going to say that's a loss too. I think San Fran's really good. And who knows what the injury situations are going to be like at this point, but I think Baltimore loses a close game there. Week 17 against the Dolphins, I'll say that's a win. Jalen Ramsey could be back by then. I really like the Dolphins roster this year. They'll see Deshaun Elliott and Eli Apple, but I think Baltimore will win this game. Then the Pittsburgh game in week 18, I'm going to say they lose this game. It's kind of tough for me to say that, but this is a game where maybe playoff spots hang in the balance. I think that if there is a playoff spot in the balance for the Ravens, they win it. But I'm going to say they lose it because I think they'll already have some sort of spot locked up there. So 12-5 is my official prediction for the Ravens this season. I think 13-4, I could see 13-4, but I'm going to say 12-5 is my official record prediction for the Ravens in 2023. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. More Ravens content from us. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.